events are a symptom of something more primordial. They're the outward envelope of a message buried deeper than historicism can reveal, and deeper still than the fashionable metaphysics or isms of the day. It's to arcane grounds that we must look to understand this message. Can metaphysics, myths, and traditional symbolism be used to interpret what spoke through the perversions of the coronation? Does any of it speak of what will come to be? Folk's authentic myths express an archetype in the unconscious. They're not some story. They demand through impulsions in the people that a king be and bring about its expression in the world. This archetype, though, is termed hyperagent by cognitive scientists and distributed cognition in the cognitive science literature. But to get closer to the folk message, we'll simply translate the Latin hyperagent to the Anglo-Saxon overking. That best names the instance of the higher order phenomena that's the focus of our questioning today. The death of the old monarch marked midnight in the cycle of the return of the king. This cycle is no novel, no dusty fantasy. It's a primordial pathway in the traditional order that Tolkien intuited. We hoped for the coronation to be a beacon of this return, a lighthouse to guide the Overking's order back to shore. We waited for Charles to show signs that he was bringing this about, but the House of Windsor has failed. This leaves us with three questions. If the return of the king is denied, what is prophesied to occur in mythic patterns? Are there signs and events that this pattern is actually playing out? What are we destined to do in that event? We must pierce deep into events like ancient Seers to answer that. Seeking in old ways to uncover higher truth, we must see without the death clutch of regime Scientology and bring the autistic eye only after we've delved. I don't want you to believe what we are to see and hear. Just understand the distinctions being made. Let predictive power be the judge. The question is, will you cast off the webs of modernity and risk what these dark riddles may reveal? We take the form of philosophical exaltation and symbolic description. All events here are observable in the coronation broadcast. Let's begin. Soul of the walk-in. Backward goes our gaze now to Coronation Day, London. We notice soldiers disembark here from the trains in rich ceremonial garb, pipes, tartans, and redcoats. They greet their officers beaming fraternal smiles of kin, bonds that can only be formed in the special initiation of supreme risk to life, a death dealing as death itself. They exude an overflowing power given by something higher they've been initiated into. The Overking grants these soldiers an abundance of being, and it demands a promised homecoming in return today. Even we feel something deeply destined about this image, this assembling of warriors of land marching on Westminster with sword and drum. Where does this affect, this emotive data come from, though? They're fulfilling an unconscious archetype that's passed father to son. And this speaks to the deeper reason we're here today. This impulsion demands that we witness and they enact the ancient northern warrior assembly called a ding or a thing, where our ancestors would meet under sky, cosmos, in the presence of divinities, with the council of the ancestors on consecrated earth, to decide the names of things, to grant English meaning and place to things, and to designate great threats for conquest. But who decided this stuff? No one individual did. This was no modern vote. This assembly was for the removal of the failings of the individual, for the sake of something higher. They weren't there to represent themselves. They were in homogeneous participation as and with this traditional organism now unconscious to us. This means having the bulk of the tribe's warriors in attendance to vote increases the likelihood that the will of the distributed gods and ancestors will be mediated. England expects that every man shall do his duty. England as an overking, Admiral Nelson. The true meaning of this, the overking, through every man, unconsciously impels and expects its king and every man to enact English ways in the world by granting English things, English reality, or space. To enact English reality was to name and conquer what is parasitic to this archetypal type or will. This can only be if the soldiers are sanctified, granted authority through an oath and homogenizing ritual to become this overking's sword arm in the world. Authority is not a legal status, some grubby bureaucrat's signature on a piece of paper. It's a granting of mental energy, if you like, as a loose definition. True authority means one's own true being, truth. It's an existential transformative force that's given by what founded it for the English in the first place. It can't be given by some bureaucrat. It's not a law. We don't worship the law. We worship what's deeply underneath it, the divine. The regime would have us forget that this is not a desire that seeks to be satisfied by mere ceremonial gesture, medications of theatrical catharsis that would patronize and placate the folk. It's an archetypal, heroic order that demands true enactment in the world, and it must be born on the back, in the real, on the back of our great men from and with the locus of this archetype, the king. If not, fury brews. And good thing too. The people will no longer be fooled. COVID has awakened us, and we sense something is deeply wrong here. And it was wrong right from the beginning. We'll return to the hopeful spirit of these warriors soon, but for now, we move to darker places. Earlier, by order of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the coronation oil was consecrated overseas rather than in England. It was not made to ancient recipe, but to woke, animal-friendly standards, so a king already is to be anointed with a filthy rainbow potion. A brand slopped on his forehead by the claw of a traitor-held bishop. Not a good start, and not a good omen. Carnage of the Black Mother. Forward goes our gaze now to Westminster Abbey. More rain and impenetrable cloud. Charles is yet to arrive in carriage. Something speaks wrong here too. What is this alien, untraditional structure extending out of the cathedral entrance to the street? Some machine-printed plastic rain shelter to hold back natural conditions from the king? Unsure of the significance, we continue inside the cathedral, though, and it dawns. Hundreds of lamps on roof scaffolds beam infernal light penetrating every corner of the cathedral. Nothing escapes these alienating beams. And in the light of the profane, all that is gold does not glitter. The ritual equipment has the sheen of Madame Tussauds, an uncanny valley and clear demonstration of all that's wrong with profane Scientology, as I call it. And gods have always fled the profane, not unlike the uncertainty principle. The more arrogant that we are of the known position of all things, covered in our explanations, light, the less locatable will God be. The essence of sacred space, the indeterminacy of primordial being, must be held fast from profane logos' thirst to map all as certain signs, the infernal light of modern man's self-asserting knowing and his arrogance. Dead Luciferian light is the perfect expression for the castrations of affect, meaning, and life we see here. That does not mean, though, the absence of romantic additive. It means the absence of truth, the ground of being. And in this profane space, we see cynical dark triad elites swan into the cathedral like an absurd theatre cast, each oozing with the black glow of self-worship and toxic egoism. None wear ceremonial garb here. They're dressed for a syncretist diversity pattern. A white woman enters wearing the furs of some Pacific Island tribe, 1% of her descent, yet chosen here to demonstrate who the true monarch is. The narcissist queen seeking self-worship for her own lack. Her coven is the new order of the Garter. At the cutting edge of inversion of value and virtue, filth is made high until all is brought low. None of this is for the overking's sake, for your sake. It's for the soulless elites to tell you, kneel ye conquered swine. Your sacred space is their carnival. Your sacred symbols are their souvenirs for happy snaps. Your worthless god is their mannequin. They hate it all, and they hate you most of all. That's what this obviously demonstrates. It's a disgusting, despicable display. Foreign religions and folk are paraded like cattle in front of the king and directed to grant him sacred English symbols. In the vesting of the Ring of England and Scotland, neither folk are mentioned once, not in the whole ceremony. Therefore, he's not bound to you, and you to him. That's no accident. Symbolic power is inverted here to form a prison for Charles, who at heart is a good man, surrounded by decay and decadence. He's handcuffed by alien religions and cultures, castrated by the unbeing of the black Cybele of the ancient world, guttural mother god of primitive tribes, and the death of all heroes and distinction. Her dark tentacles here invert all virtue. The eminent machine of technical European man, once his heroic pride, is made her enforcer. Through her minion she crowns Charles king of Nietzsche's last men. He has made a Hades, a warden of the fallen here. How could this happen? What does this mean? We must examine all the symbolic events we've noticed so far to try to decipher their meaning. Here we mustn't be dismissive. Primordial symbolism first made being intelligible. The imagistic predates and predicates all propositional language and ideas. And that's where we must look. Whispers of the old ones. Backward goes our gaze now. We're outside of the building, the cathedral, the coronation's in progress. We have the bird's eye view, the cathedral before us, London around it, rain-swept silent streets. We dwell with this silence to hear what it speaks. What is this ghostly music? At this distance, coronation singing echoes from the cathedral. Like some lost civilization damned to limbo, devoid of life, calling, don't forget the dead. Haunting. This symbolizes a truth about religious posturing, though. All the choirs and trumpets in the world can't summon God to a ceremony void of belief. He's not a utility to switch off and on like wizardry. Murky cloud also masks the sky. The cosmos of mind for early thought. This speaks to the imposition of technical ideology, obscuring and castrating contact with divinity, or the first thing that's sent from the ground of being. The alien structure protruding from the cathedral, as an omen, it was a modern intrusion. It didn't belong. To the ancients, this would suggest a cutting off of earth, the chaos of nature, what the Greeks call physis, a sprouting from unknown. Together, physis and logos grant life. This ceremony, though, at its ground, was life-denying. But what else? Since the death of the old monarch, the machine had time to lay plans to stand between the people and the divine, and these early omens show that. It had time to counter the traditional organism that we saw emerge in the funeral, and you can look at my video about that, which speaks in a similar way. It had time. The technical machine had time. The dead techne machine had time to get in its way. It had time to corrupt every life-giving access point of authentic being, of outside, as Nick Lang calls it. So you would have no alternate access to truth but through their disgusting technical frauds that they used to enslave you. Inside the cathedral now. We return to Charles's call ritual, interacting with the sacred symbols, the pseudo-clergy passing them to him. Only twice, though, during this whole thing, do we sense the affect of divinity present, the removal of his royal robes to his white undershirt, and the encasement of the supertunica, a golden, anglicized Byzantine robe, but not the crowning itself. That is devoid of divine presence by the perversions of the ceremony, and we'll see why. It will not, the Overking will not baptize the evil that surrounds Charles. If Hollywood index cards don't reveal this to you, you're not looking hard enough. It's a pantomime. Charles himself is removed from mortal refinements. By looking at all these symbols together, we see that Charles is removed of mortal refinements and cleansed of animality. That's what the ceremony means. That's what symbolically, and you can see a video I've done about that. He is purified for ascent as a good man. But this crowning, which is supposed to sanctify the corporate body of the state, right, as transcendent under a king's true rule, is withheld from the blessing. It will not baptize, the Overking will not baptize the evil that surrounds Charles, and even the confusion that the evil has pushed onto him. These are early clues. But we must dig deeper to hear the Overking's whispers, the old one's whispers. What are we missing here? So backward we go again. Backward goes our gaze to the last monarch's coronation. To look deeper, we're met with the elders of the folk in the middle of a ritual, a divine assembly of bejeweled goddesses and demigods in arcane robes holding ornate artifacts. The pool glow of a single analog light source prepares the space with a seen unseen to presence. The queen is surrounded by bishops. They each place a hand on her golden supertunica and collectively lower and enthrone her on the chair of St. Edward. Here we see a symbol of the hyperagent that is the Overking in action. Collective elders temporalize him. They bring him down into manifestation, lowering his spirit into her. This is the twin of the action performed at the funeral, with a collective unit of coffin bearers raised her up again, releasing the hyperagent from the temporal back to the transcendent. What begins with a lowering ends with a raising. And we feel the affect here, don't we? Let's watch it for a second. Now the Archbishop fronts the Queen and slowly lowers the crown onto her head. And at that very moment, the robed aristocracy, Parliament, and the House of Lords crown themselves with coronets. And here's the distinction. This is obviously a participatory kin rite of a homogeneous divinizing akin to the warrior assembly of ancient times, the thing we mentioned earlier. Its absence from the modern coronation is damning. We sense a familiar, subtle awe with it, and it's here that we know it's in touch with, it's the echo, the distant echo of the ground of English being, the ground of this authority we were looking for. We would not sense the same awe and rightness with a Hindi ceremony or North Korean ceremony. It deeply matches a folk pattern in the unconscious, what phenomenologists of affect call affective data. The whole assembly here is bathed in a divinizing light, the seen unseen. We make contact with a residue of spiritual authority here. Unlike temporal power, this moves you without force and realigns what stands out in the world as possible for the will before we can even choose a goal in the first place. And it's important to remember as well that the old monarch failed this. She didn't bring it back. She oversaw the ashes. But the ceremony itself has the clue for us to follow the affective whispers we were looking for and what we seek. So with that in mind, we come back to present. Lion of the unseen, bear of the cave. Having touched a trace of authority in what has been, we bring our gaze back to the present, to abstract space, to re-question all the events. Underneath all the waxwork's degeneracy, we sense the same distant affect, but in a different mode, watching from the seen unseen, growing in rage. We hold on to it and question the silence. Where is this overking, this hyperform? How have old kings touched and granted spiritual authority? Nothing. To truly think is to extinguish all known answers based on second-hand propositions. Only then does the questioning of true thought begin. Only then does this call the unknown to speak out of itself. We ask again, where is this overking? How have old kings touched this authority? And slowly emerging, echoing out of the background, a cavernous primordial roar calls in the distance, somehow familiar. We can't really recall where we've heard it before. We can't also help but be drawn towards it. And as we do, a bronze lion with heavy patina, warmed by time and fate, presences from out of the shadows. Yes, of course. What better primordial symbol to decode our riddles than England's? This is a being that guards the dark frontier, a flame spark from a furnace of ancestral possibility. Its eyes open for the first time in centuries. They glow a rusty gold, reawakening power. It's a power for the sake of which traditional ceremony is enacted, a power that guards the gate to all meaning and divine that flows from the ground of English truth. The 3 lines of England are meaningful here. They mark the first time this symbol expressed the Overking's immortality directly when Richard the Lionheart changed his symbol from 2 lines to 3. A mortal king is always the middle lion. His father and his son surround him. Past is with him, future is with him. The trinity of lions show the king as principle incorporated. The royal we is immortal 3, past, present, and future at the same time. So we understand its hyperagentness, its immortality, but how does the lion symbol show us the source of authority is another question. Before we languaged existence with words like reality and presence, the features of reality reveal themselves to man through sacred symbolism. More practically, this can be considered psychotechnology, far superior to normal language, which can be manipulated in mind to mediate and disclose higher-order truth. To the ancients, the lion is a king of animals and the first in the hierarchy. It has a crown mane, it's gold. But but it doesn't hunt the lionesses. It's said to guard the cave den in the mountains and the early Greek bestiaries. Now, stay with me here. This will pay dividends of insight. The cave is the cosmic symbol of initiation. Man initiates out of manifestation of the cave wall into the dark unseen towards the seed and principle, which is behind all manifestation. These are symbols that come together to understand these primordial metaphysical phenomena. This is some symbolism to reveal metaphysics. The cave is the microcosm of the cosmic egg, the universe, like we are a microcosm of both. Man's body being manifestation and his mind being virtuality of a seed. Well, what does that mean, virtuality? The metaphor should be simple, pretty simple to understand. A seed is virtual potential, the possibility of a plant in the state of virtuality before being actualized as a tree, sprouting as a tree. So this is like man. You exist as possibility to act, a virtual seed that could unfold in all manner of ways in a day or in a life. That round seed also shows you what your essence is. You look around yourself and you are a microcosm of cosmos. A round bubble virtual space, a seed outward looking from a point that is you. Because you haven't acted yet, right? Your mind is virtual. This world presence is as, looks to you as, and by means of your possibilities, the seed, in the light of your understanding. Your knowing, your skills give form to how the world looks to you and is for you, allowing what is relevant to stand out as valuable and dangerous. Your skills change how the world is for you and looks to you. The seed has potential to be a plant, just like you do, to be all these other things. You are possibility. The cave in this scenario stands for the initiation towards truths and wisdoms that grant higher possibilities, which are not with your current seed, truths which completely rewrite your possibilities and how the world is for you, or how the world is. The Mabangoi, in the original source of Arthurian mythos, states the king is also a bridge. This means the king is supposed to guard and mediate the way to this truth, this cave, this initiation, with the tradition, but at the same time he's also a priest. He provides a model of spiritual initiation as something higher than the mortal he is. The lion is also the people's will. The king is a meta-will. He takes the spiritual truth and authority gained from the cave and directs the will of the nation. The cave is something different. It's from the divine. The initiation grants you something that changes the very being that you are from the ground, underneath it, like you've been given a hyper-agent. Politics is the world of this surface will. Religion and speculative philosophy disclose the truth underneath it, which rewrite the very world possibilities that you are underneath the will. So you probably won't even want the same things that you would before you took this initiation. It completely transforms you. Myths abound of lions being overcome through alliance and conquest by heroes. As men, we all have will, so both the mortal king and we must overcome this surface lion to get to the seed and the heart and the initiation going into the cave. This was what the alchemists knew as the lion, this will, to be reborn. We must undertake initiation towards the authentic seed to refresh and rewrite it. And he's supposed to guard that as the true and the ethnic version of it for his particular people, for his folk. For Europeans, the first symbol of this is actually more illuminating, though. It was the bear. He guards the den and goes to the dark for a period of hibernation, only to arise again, power renewed. The Celtic word for bear is Arthur. King Arthur will return. These primordial symbols matter. They're expressing something deep, spiritually, not just mythologically. This also shows that the king doesn't take his cues from the degraded demos of collective conscious spirit of the age, but the gods and the spirits of the depths, collective folk unconscious. His source of authority and confidence in his action must come from outside, from this initiation, from the divine, a guide free of all modern will and common zeitgeist, common Weltanschauung. How else could one bear the burden of rule than going through this initiation? Than through the true conviction that outside authority provides to a true king. Because if you're just this modernistic ego, you'll crumble under that weight, completely crumble. That's why you end up with these stupid, bloody bureaucracies. And they can't rule any better either. But what use is knowing this is another question. Well, now we don't just have affect, We also know a pattern of action to look for here, a pattern that the English unconscious demands be fulfilled. So we're getting closer. Where else do we see patterns, similar patterns? Who else did we sense carried the same affective charge of this? Essence of the folk, walk-in, nomos, and value hierarchy. Forward goes our gaze now to the gardens of Buckingham Palace. 4,000 soldiers of the British Armed Forces fall in and form up on the grass for presentation to the newly crowned king. Unlike the corrupt coronation here, these soldiers carry a hidden through line to authentic being. Inside the high walls of the Crown Estate, outside the rule of the degenerate Church of England, we come to find a ground of English being with these 4,000 walk-in, standing in complete silence. Listen to it. A lack of speaking is also communication. A gesture says things that words never could. What does it speak? Where is our captain to lead us? Where now the horse? Where now the rider? Where now the glad voices of the hall? Where now the hearth and the giver of rings? Those are the first thoughts, the Dark Age verse, the wanderer or the exiled one. It finishes, gone the bright grail, gone the shield thing, gone the glory of kings. How that time has passed, dark under nightshade, as though it had never been. Exile is a threat of what will come to pass if destiny is turned away from, but not yet. This sturdy, unshakable drill and square still hold fast here. There's something about it. The nation's sons form a wider organism of old martial procedure. Something here is true and sturdy, and it must be examined and delved into. This raises two questions. What is the essence, then, of a warrior? What is the origin of this tradition and procedure that this group of men are enacting and are an expression of? Why would that feel right to us? To ask about essence means to ask what and where is the being, the ultimate ground of English soldier, of English warrior. For Dark Age man, he took the real as it was given, not as he forced it or we forced it to presence to us. This was before we took the real as defined and possessed known, before we knew anything for sure at all. Known and unknown were in a liminal space. To get a sense of that requires the existential analytic, though, which takes man's essence for ecstatic existence. What does that mean, though? The word existence means ex, out, istance, set up to stand, etymologically. A set up, outstanding. The word ecstatic means to be out of body, standing. If the essence of man is ecstatic existence, it means you are neither subject nor object, but both, the outstanding in the world as knower of world. You are made of what world you know, and understanding that gives form to your world and how you see it. Like we were talking about with the seed earlier. You are the space, the disclosed space, that the knowledge of being set up to stand. The knowing of being, the knowing of physics, the knowing of nature is brought in. That's what you look at this page and video with right now. Your understanding is the interpretation that co-creates the space you're in. After watching this video, insights will change your world ever so slightly. From that perspective, warriors are the extension, the outer march of English existence in space. But what was the beginning of this space, and how was it begun? All folk existence, world space that we are, was founded in the claim of war. Whether that's war of questioning to grasp the truth of the unknown, or the violent victory over nature and enemy space. The sacred space and wholly co-founded by warrior priests, allied with divinities, conquered and opened space to exist for the first time for its own sake and truth. Before this is merely unknown outside. This is difficult and may go over your head at first, but it's something that becomes clear over time. We'll say it in many ways as we come forward. Understand that you can't see and know without contrast, without value for things. This is driven by your limitations, such as death and the sacred. Animals have eyes, but they do not see. They don't know because they lack the sacred space at the ground of all knowing. They lack the knowing of death. Like the communal meaning granting of things by the Northern Council we mentioned earlier, the first meaning here, primordial being, is given by divinities as a whole, a shared sacred space in participation with men, with English earth, with English cosmos or sky, for the sake of English divinity. The way space is presencing for us now, most of those are not in the equation. It's just earth. It's just materialism. So that's not the truth of what the space is as it was sent. If you remove one, the others decay because they can only be all together as they are. So we're sort of shot off in a kind of, we have been. Modernism itself is a violent autism. And the Greeks even said this. Heraclitus originally, basically the first philosopher, said that what we are is basically is homo daemon. We are essentially daemon, homo, ekon. The space for divinity. We are the void for divinity. This means that the first interpretation of the world isn't by you. At the twilight of thought, at the very beginning, the first knowings of the tribe are the sending of divinity, not any individual. They pre-exist interpretation itself and are sent with and as it. Divinity grants the folk right and wrong, the valuation that impels behavior, and that is the true wall and frontier. War men defend and extend and express. This original ground is now in the unconscious, though, which is what we're always talking about with these patterns. They used to be in a mystical participation with that stuff and these hyper forms. And the only thing that gives access to it is authentic religious initiation. That gives access to this primordial space. It holds and always is only as the warring participation of this fourfold: men, earth, sky, cosmos, and divinities. In that radical uncertainty that sacred space is. If you walk into a temple with the presumed profane that you know everything, then there is nothing outside of what your knowing is. So you can't see anything. You're not open to something disclosing itself. You profanize the sacred space by presuming with your spurg mind everything that you are, that you know everything, that everything's decided, which of course it's not. From that point on, the warrior priest, the king's sole role, and the warriors that were all sort of priests at the beginning, their sole role was to be the guardian of English sacred space. This authentic being is the ground of the temple, made safe and protected for God to presence. Everything that the coronation wasn't. It's a space from whose ground contrast and reality itself is concretized. The Greeks called this the nomos, the value hierarchy. The demos must fight for the nomos as they would for the walls of the fortifications of the polis. Heraclitus. Nomos is English ordered meaning. This meaning, this being, is what all later custom and law is founded on. So when people talk about the common law and all of that stuff, it means nothing. They're just propositions. Even the customs are. It's underneath. Its essence has power. It's like the liquid of the gods. This is the authority's ground we've been looking for. It's an order now returning from exile that we represent. It's now in the unconscious and drives traditional cycles that we've discussed today. It's these cycles that get profanized by drama and crappy television, who show perverted versions of the archetypes and take away the impulsion that's underneath, that's supposed to drive us. In this way, film is bad, entertainment's bad, even football, things like that are bad because they are interfering with something authentic that's underneath, that's driving us to enact these spirits that are dying to be heard. Warriors slay what threatens English existence with these archetypes that I'm talking about for the sake of the values of the space that we are and live in, the divinities, the sacred, and the king. We're cast off from access to the glory of this sacred space and we're thrown out into the profane modern mind. This must be rectified if we are to survive what's happening. If we are to survive everything that's going on. We're not going to survive unless we have this sacred and we find our way to the bottom of it. We're not going to. But what's the origin of this procedure and tradition that this group of men are enacting and are an expression of here today? Forming a square is a very old thing indeed. It's a warrior discipline that separated us from savages and ascended warriors to a higher order organism of spirit led by a headhunter with the procedures of the drill, the training, and the binding of the colours. English units in particular were regional, each carrying the banners, colours, and arms of English world space that they were from, and are itself at its ground. And when we think about this, the Northumberland Fusiliers is what comes to mind. If this known open space is our essence and existence, as I said earlier, then it is also the essence and existence of the men and the king who perform this ritual in front of us. What does that mean? The past that has been in the form of traditional procedure and ritual as known has not passed. It is with them here right now, because what has been is enacted. Being endures. But, we may object, these soldiers are in the modern mindset and don't know the significance of what they do. Well, they carry a hidden message, but without knowing it as a worded proposition. The tradition's truth is protected because it's enacted. It's stored and endures as procedural and participatory knowledge, despite the possession of individuals with modern propositions. Today, they enact the ritual procedures that are so taxing they don't have time to think about anything but heat, sweat, and pain. This means they do it without modern brain chatter. These marches are not utilitarian. They come from a time that still carried the meaning of holy war, folk war. Each new procedure was touched with something former and emerged from it. To drill is to make procedure your second nature. Hear that again. To make procedure your second nature. To make an older way of being your current being. It's a different kind of knowledge than book knowledge. It doesn't give you an idea, it remakes the space that you are. Their perspective and worldview is changed by this. Despite their everyday concerns, this rigor brings them to something older. This is why military men and veterans are mostly right-wing. To be in repose of an ancestral form is to imbue your being with old knowledge, old state, old space, something you might wish to conserve if you had experienced it before. What has been now is again. But what was the martial knowing made from at its ground? What was the procedure it was for the sake of? When it was formed, why was it made? This form emerges over time, defeating nature and the enemy. The ground of these rituals, these drills, these ritual equipments are and are made of English war itself. What we see is sent to us from English victory and defeat. Procedures which were responsible for winning the space in the first place, honed in the clash with enemy space, a praxis of Nike, in other words. They're an expression of our heroes' ways then, forged by these great men who made and won the day for the sake of their folk groups' divinities. The procedures that worked and birthed English space for the sake of the first warrior and priest, the king. And this is why these rituals give us the affect of something deeply familiar and authentic underneath. The war of space was established through men like these, slaying enemy, sacred, and men for the sake of sacred space, the being that we are at its ground. So these practices touch something crucial to the space that you are, and that's why you feel the affect. Their patterns are already in you, always, unconscious. That's why. We're getting closer here. How does the warrior relate to the king, though? Coming of the old ones. The king emerges from the back of the palace and stands at the summit of the steps. He looks down at the fruit of England's sons here. If we cast ourselves into his perspective, he looks out on a war horse. The mount he is to command, and what the spurs of St. George point to mediate, to be able to know what to do, to lead this thing, and to show us the actual patterns of action. By mediating the symbols ourselves, see it as a whole. The king is the crowning hierarchy. This palace, the soldiers on the lawn are his body. His being is their being. Their being finds its expression in his crown at the top of the mountain. To revisit what we said at the beginning, the warriors are here today to touch the kingly sacred source of their authority. This is not some law, some bureaucrat's signature. Each warrior is a kind of king, a mode of this organism itself. Through this tradition, the Overking provokes these warriors to be his avatar. They're participating in the organism itself and becoming it in the process. But without articulation by a proper king, they won't hear its voice, they won't understand it, and we won't. The mortal king is supposed to be a localization of this force. He is to be its head and articulator. A king must be the commanding head in practice and deeply question its being, so that he may better bring it into actuality without distortion or corruption. And the sergeant-at-arms at this moment marches out and barks.
The parade will remove headdress! Remove!
His grizzled voice carries an earthly reality, doesn't it? It speaks for something here. It's English speech, not some international technical language thrown about by merchants and foreign hordes, but the voice of the ancestors in repose who built the military procedure and passed it down to this man. He is not John Smith today. He's voice of the war king and speaks for them.
3 cheers for His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
A cacophony of English voice thunders from underneath as one. The Overking glimmers and coronates through it. This is the affect that Alexander and Caesar would have generated by their mere presence in ancient times. For a moment, we've tasted it.
Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
Not in almost a century have so many European men stood in Caesarian triumph, in traditional uniform, in front of a king in traditional uniform, enacting traditional procedure of warriors.
Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
Only distant imaginings before now, the history books are made real before our eyes. It's thrown open, a possibility. It's smashed it open of what should be, of what could be. You would not feel this charge with a Hindi ceremony. This is spoken by your people, in your language. It's meeting an unconscious pattern within you. These are not ceremonial toys. They're trained killers, many from active duty. We have no idea about the ramifications of this demonstration, none at all, nor what could trigger from it. So what does this cheer mean then, if it's important? What about this procedure and cheer touches us? Our earlier examination of the essence of a warrior helps us here. Birthday cheers celebrate the yearly expansion of the knowing space that you are. This is a clue. Hooray is another form of huzzah. Huzzah is cried in victory by the Royal Navy at the raising of a flag. Victory is the birth of new space. Ships are birthed. The birth of England is when the flag is raised for the first time, consecrated with collective cheer. The huzzah and the flag raising consecrate a ship of fellows together as one folk being. It casts English ownership over the land and the sea and the spirit, as men, as embodied souls, and as a kin. This collective celebration is the true coronation. And it's a granting of the ruling organism at the top of the flagpole, the Overking. But remember, this isn't the government. It's unconscious. It's a spirit. The old ones roar. Charles lets out a satisfied breath in response to this cheer of loyalty. What has been satisfied in him? What is that? Look carefully again at it. What is meant to be now is. What is, though, this meant to be that is being fulfilled? Something in his and our unconscious, an archetype you could call it, an expected procedure has been fulfilled by the soldier's action. This isn't just the elation of the people cheering you that anyone could feel, though. It's contentment. Contentment in fulfillment. The archetype is that a king have loyal warriors. Those loyal warriors, though, have a loyal mortal king who commands them in action, directly, as and from the Overking they all participate in, the hyper-agent itself. This is a paradox. Who is the form the other is to model themselves on? Well, the king and the soldiers are different modes of the Overking. One's the head and the other are the body. This means that something is deeply wrong here, if we take that as given and true. The king is failing to enact his part in the play. The greatest duty of a king is to command the soldiers directly, as an embodiment of the Overking, the principle. Notice there's no anything given here from Charles. It's just received. There's no royal salute. There's nothing. It demonstrates symbolically, as an omen, that he's a passive receiver. And we know that because if there was any time a king should be taking emergency powers and ruling by royal prerogative to preserve the realm and folk, it's now. This is a rejection of a principle that awoke with the death of the old monarch, a wind that pressed for Charles to see it and be its expression. But this House of Windsor has failed us. They failed to see it. No longer icy, no longer willing to wait, the Overking withdraws his consent and calls for true chosen. The lion leaps forth from the dark into you, English, to do this. Enough, it roars, enough! Forsaken no longer, exiled no longer, as a wanderer I go, a grey pilgrim. Among you, a storm winds the rain. Shunned by the sword and the sceptre, wholly we whisper in vain. Where now my horse and my rider? Where now my lord giving ring? Where now my captain, commander, son of the banners, the kin? Yet a wanderer I go, a grey pilgrim, among you as storm winds the rain, shunned by the sword and the sceptre, wholly we whisper in May. Now among you, my sons, a successor, heard at dawn, at the spur of the hunt, called chosen bring death to the Lecher, and the boar thunders bare from the dust. Yet a wanderer I walk, a grey pilgrim, among you as storm winds the rain, shunned by the sword and the sceptre. Wholly we whisper this day, but a whisper once gold pierces nightshade, but an ember from ash thaws the sleep. But a forgotten god strikes the Saxon, lights abyss with lost roots from the deep. A true king commands us today. Rise God!
Hip, hip!
Rise England!
Hip, hip!
Rise King!
Hip, hip!
Prophecies of the chosen few. With all that in mind, we bring our gaze back to the silence of abstract space to seek answers to the last of our questions posed at the outset. We question the dark again. What occurs when the return of the king is denied? Ancient symbolism and prophecy bring to our mind's eye a grey pilgrim, an old man on a white horse galloping up and up to higher levels of a castle perched on the side of a cliff. He retreats from a chaotic flood torrenting in after him from the postern gate by the sea. What does this mean? A pilgrim is one who is on a holy mission. The white horse makes him no mere man, though. Here he's returning from sacred space. He brings a re-divinized authority, purpose, and world with him. He retreats upward. Retreat is not flight, though. It's a consolidation and careful withdrawal. He gathers to him the light, the true unconscious order in exile, to crush the dragon regime of the Dark Mother. The horse is the first step of man above himself and command. It means you are fit to command a larger distributed spirit. It shows the mastery of man over his animal nature and its spiritualization. White expresses a high level of purity, which means it's abstracted. It's ascended from the temporal more than other colors, more distinction, more free of decay of time. It demonstrates a ruling eternal order. This is why emperors also ride white horses. Their body is also in you. They're an institution, a corporation. From the outside, from the hyper, though, grounded in the spirit, they're a corporation. That corporation is itself an entity that existed before them in both conscious and unconscious realms. It's deeply authentic. It's grounded in this spirit that we've been talking about. It can't be mapped by cognition. Fundamentally, it's sourced from the unknown, the outside, the primordial matrix. Riding this spirit then to the top of the castle means that this pilgrim, a Woden Merlin figure, brings the ruling transcendent principle, a king from the unseen waters at the bottom of the mountain to the top of the hierarchy. This order returning from long exile is us, or at least the authentic ground that impels us from places unseen This symbolic image aligns perfectly with the mythic order of the English and the Anglo and the ancient tradition of the king of the world itself. We are in the period of the coming of the flood. A Dragonslayer begins his rise. When Robin Hood mythos is united with Arthurian mythos, you see such an eventuation. Robin is the order in exile. If Richard fails to return from the Crusades, this order is the only authority in the land. It has the truth of the tradition and stands as the overking in the king's absence. We're the order in exile. We're the people in the greenwood. We're sourced from the ground of chaos, the primordial matrix and outside. We see this occur in Tolkien's stories with Strider, a mere ranger, a ragged ranger crowned as king, last of a ragged house, long bereft of lordship. We see this in Arthur's crowning in Merlin, by Merlin, and Arthur's birth from the primordial waters that brought him on dragon's ship to Uther's Keep. We see this in Tennyson. His poems reveal this too. But do we trust these mythic patterns? Aren't they just stories? People might say. Fair enough. We can at least trust that they map unconscious patterns and archetypes of the folk, which are patterns of action fundamentally. And even more fundamentally than that, outside, hyperagents. For the materially minded, we can at least state that these mythic patterns express the procedural pathway of highest value and impulsion for the folk group, meaning the pathway of least resistance and highest possibility of support. If the mythic pattern of action is enacted, it will generate a libidinal response in the folk group to support it and play their respective roles. Like the people supporting Tommy Robinson's action because they aligned with Robin Hood's structure fundamentally. The value structure. This hyperagent will drive its own birth into actuality. It already is. It's already driving you. If you're part of this movement, underneath, you just don't know it. You think it's you. But it's deeper than that. The mythic is far more than libidinal force, though. But for now, we'll leave that. And the acausal effects of synchronicity and hyperstition, we'll leave that to the side for another time. But we should note here that politics is the way of the plausible, not the possible. The folk unconscious is the ground, though, of our behavioral possibility, of reality's possibility. Events aligning with these unseen structures open the way for new possibilities of action to unfold, if understood. They're the invisible perspectival lines in the world that give possibility in the first place. They're the invisible perspectival lines in the world that are capable of flipping the chessboard underneath the politics chess game. I'll leave you with this to explain that. Curtis Yarvin wrote, "In politics, only the plausible is possible." My response to that is, in the mythic only, is the possibility of the real, of the plausible, remade and recast. King of the chosen. If the overking isn't with Charles, who is it consolidating with? Well, what is a true king? He's a bridge and spiritual initiation and a chief warrior and temporal commander, as we said before. What kind of man would a true king need to be to claim both these characteristics in this age? A supreme soldier, a man who has the potential to see the world in an anti-modern way. That means postmodern, that means young and virile, doesn't it? What else would he need? An abundance of vitality, charisma. Yes, his authority and his belief comes not from the spirit of the age, but the spirit of the ancestors. This grants him a superabundance of being and conviction, meaning his authority comes not from an individual ego. No, he's a man inborn with potential for religious zeal and a connection with transcendent being. He has to bear this overking after all. Yet, like a Caesar, he's tactical and earthly and prudent. And the temporal aristocracy fell long ago. We know that. They're not a spiritual aristocracy anymore. So he's probably more likely to have the ring of a common accent. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future, as Tolkien said. From the ashes, a fire shall be woken. His nobility comes from virtue, like Robin. All these things will be latent in him, like a seed, honed in the discipline of the ways of war. He'd need to inspire a deep loyalty and devotion. He'd need to have brotherly allies whose bonds can be relied on. That means bonds forged in extreme risk to life and battle, not cynical Machiavellian alliances. He'd need to temper, though, his superabundance of power with a modesty and grace so he can rise in a hostile environment while holding true to those principles at the ground. Kipling said, "The sea will be parted at the point where those who by their mere multitude hold it in place." Where do the mere multitude hold the sea in place? The majority of the warriors who hold a monopoly on violence and the majority of the people who unconsciously hold the regime's false myth in place and bar us from the future. This man is before our very eyes right now. Look out here at this image. What do you see here? Here's the King of England. The king is one of these here soldiers. Imagine for a moment what it felt like to be in the middle of this 4,000 men. Place yourself there in mind, all chanting in unison, in traditional uniform, operating traditional procedure, and all looking up at this glistering celestial crown. Yet they receive nothing in return. Yet they know deep down this king won't rule and enact his role. These men know something is deeply wrong in this age, and deeply wrong in England. What would solve it? What does feel right? What they're participating in does. It's more right in relation to the bonds of brotherhood they feel for each other when fighting to survive on deployment. The rest of the time they feel like mechanical pawns pushed about by economic machines. This triumph and call to true leadership feels real. He has now seen what traditional forms look like. Such a thing has not been seen in a century and cannot be seen in New World states. Think about it. To have the true conviction and confidence needed to rise as a true king requires you not be driven by modern utility brain. He'd have to have been touched by the transcendent principle in old ritual. If not here, then where? And so we understand that this event cut deeply into the unconscious of the soldiers here. It cleared a possibility, dormant in being. True kingship, this is what could authentically be. They're out of their liberal egos here, thrown out of the modern. They're tasting what a traditional martial political life should be, with a return to meaning and being at its ground. He's with the true warriors. He knows their brotherhood of kin. He knows the regime and the king do not speak for the kin, but he's touched it. And now he knows, in the first seed of intelligibility, that the spirit of the king exists with him and is bigger than any man, and perhaps that spirit calls to him as chosen king. The king has come. The king has come. The king has come. Prepare now. His arrival is yet to be. At this very moment, like you all are, perhaps he watches. In this case, I address this man directly. There's something you've always wondered, brother. Something you've always known. On the edge of your sight, something deep down told you you were called for something great. You know it. Called beyond the machinations of economy and comfort. Some latent power grew and grew with you in the dark, and now on this day of days it made contact with its firing source. This is the beginning. This cheer is from these men is for you, and for we, and for this overking, a hyper form that is now thrown to you, brother. Caesar, Alexander, Alfred the Great, these men were no mere individuals. Those who worshipped them and served with them knew the same. They participated in a greater imperial spirit together, a higher order organism which they felt directly, which we touched earlier. We saw the hip hip hooray. That is the king that we serve. You, in some sense, have already known and already wondered, is it me? The answer is yes, it's you. It's you. It is you. But why you? No one with these sorts of skills and background would without destiny, would ever ask that question. Asking the question implies the answer, brother. The people are readying. The enemy is moving. The hour is late. Yes, it's you. These are the conditions of all Arthurs. They're heralded by the instigation of symbolic events. The machinations of AI and technocratic internationalist schemes reach their highest danger. Paraphrasing the poet Hölderlin, as the dark grows, so too does the possibility to invert it. So too does the light itself. COVID and regime overreach prepared the way. Post-ironic humor brings the people to the truth, out of illusion. And now comes true zeal. The floods rise. The enemy surrounds us. The wizard rides upward, gathering the light and heralding the king. We have heard your call, immortal one. Begins a gentle candle in the darkest sea, to be but to be. Raging beacon, iridescent, shield for the truthful, sword for true chosen. Courage, English courage, to bleed and call the light. Today the light gathers and consolidates. Today the darkness rises, now to the light of heaven. Today we begin. Today we move. Today we know the light of God can never be extinguished, and the law of heaven comes to the field. He calls his chosen to bring their swords. The task of the chosen. There's one question we still have not answered. What is our destiny? Do we all have a role to play in this grand movement of heaven and earth that we're speaking of? It's our purpose to break open the way for the king's arrival, to open latent possibilities in the people. All have a role to play in this mighty happening. 1, initiate a radical breakout of the modernist way of seeing and mind. Only by breaking their enforcement thinking can we turn towards destiny. We're staging a radical invasion of the outside, as Nick Land would put it. A radical breakout from being. We need to be touched by this authentic at its ground, to have the conviction and the authority. Because that's what the regime lacks, is true authority. We have that. We are that. We are this returning order in exile. So the radical breakout begins with us as the first step, the initiation. Pagans, esotericists, Jungians, Christians, all are welcome in this, but all must turn to ancient symbolic ways of seeing, at least to get it conceptually, and begin practices and methods of changing their mind frame to perspectively disclose authentic being. To at least taste it, so they're driven by this power that I am here speaking with you today. This isn't, this is driven from somewhere. It's not, it's not me acting. It's through me that it's coming. And so everyone needs that energy. 1, sacrifice and ties. We cannot aid the Dragonslayer without the truth of belief. This we have alone. They have a dying, resentful superstition. We have the truth of mythos and being and authority. It's our only advantage. We have God on our side. Cynical Machiavellians must not lead. The link to sacrifice and tithes, and to participate and not be an NPC, sacrifice something of value to you, like money, or your time, or your energy, or your expertise. Right here is a link, scottmannion.com/membership, so you can join in this happening. 2, forge a virtue engine, building your virtue engine of practices that allows you to transcend motivations of economy as a provoked being, and give motivation for meaning instead, from being. 3, fasting. Practices of removing the enemy's control mechanism, sport, entertainment. You no longer can be a member of any national sports club. It's a method of control, and the authentic archetypal patterns aren't able to emerge. Same with drama. Stop watching regime, disgusting, crappy movies that actually are designed to take away the true purpose and pattern from you. Fasting. You must learn how to do this. 4, conversion and polemic. Your sport and entertainment now, funnily enough, you've got something to replace it. It's going to be shit posting and memeing anonymously, content army, and converting others to the mission. That's what we're doing here. It is the post-ironic humor that friends like Sam Hyde are so good at. Many of you are already doing this. Train each other. That's part of it. Conversion and polemic online and in person. After all, this will all be legal. This isn't going to be, it's opening the possibility. 6, fraternal greenwoods, network organizations or conclaves and mutual aid co-ops. 7, artisan hyperstition. Now, this is important because it is not vitalist art. This art changes reality itself by projecting the vision of the truth of the future that's coming. It's hyperstition. It's bringing from the outside, from the hyper agent, projecting the true vision, and really actually brings it into being. As Nick Land talks about, this isn't just bullshit. There's strong philosophy under this. 8, meta-law experimental researchers, folk research, radical experimentation with the esoteric. So members can participate in this experimental stuff, and it's very important for things as we go forward and the discovery of new practices. 9, Arak, religious acceleration. Ancient religious and esoteric practices such as the Orthodox Church, for instance, for the Christians, and perhaps Julius of Ola and stuff like that for pagans, and those disclosed by other traditionalist thinkers allow this process of true initiation to prosper, and understanding that it's accelerating, and we can use the acceleration to bring about a return to true religion, though. God save the king. Specific practices and details to come after Sacrifice Brothers. I look forward to meeting you all. See you in the comments. God bless.